Welcome, everybody. I've got an interesting topic for you today, the entire IoT security space. And I'm going to do that in 30 minutes because I can. I just want to give you my thoughts. So first of all, I'm an industry analyst, right? So I think about the components of an industry. Part of my job is to categorize and create a way to think about the industry. And overall, for all of security, I think in a layered model because I'm old. And because that's how we always used to do it, right? You had network, endpoint, application, data. Those were the main buckets for security. But of course, over time, things start to infiltrate that don't quite fit. And you can't just add them as another layer. And for sure, IoT security writ large is one of those. IoT security is a shard of the entire industry. In other words, if you were looking at the industry in a looking glass and it broke, you would still see all the components of it in each of those shards. And IoT security is just like that. There's network security for IoT. There is endpoint security for IoT. There's application security, identity security, et cetera. So each of the major components of a security stack are replicated in the IoT world. One of the ways you can identify when to treat a segment like this as a totally separate market is that the buying centers are different, right? They're different people. And in the IoT space, this is probably one of the most dramatic differentiations, right? You do not go into the CISO, at least when the industry started 10, 12 years ago, you didn't go into the CISO and sell him or her some sort of endpoint security for your PLCs or a data diode network gateway for your manufacturing plant floor. So that buying center difference makes for a different market because it means that the traditional IT security vendors, the firewall vendors and the antivirus vendors are lost if they go and try and sell to a manufacturing plant some sort of endpoint antivirus, right? People are going, are you kidding? Every time I'm on a machine that has your Symantec or McAfee running on it, it slows it down. And then right in the middle of a presentation, it starts to reboot the machine or something. You can't have that in manufacturing environments, obviously. So that gives us the scene we're looking at today, just kind of a little place setter there. There's a few things that trouble me when I think about the IoT security space, and that is that IoT is bigger than IT. There are more IoT devices than there are IT devices. So why is IoT security such a small segment of the overall industry? Because certainly IoT security, and I believe this, could be bigger than typical IT security. It all comes down to the threat actors. And the threat actors are what drive our industry. Without the threat actors, we wouldn't need security. And this just, is a story that is told over and over. It has such a big impact on our industry. It's one of the reasons that the security industry as a whole is not consolidating. No matter how many times you hear journalists or other analysts say the industry is consolidating, it's not. Just because one company acquires another company doesn't indicate consolidation. Now, I live in Detroit, where slightly more than 100 years ago, there were over 100 automotive manufacturers, brands, companies that made cars from the ground up. They even made the engines themselves. Obviously, they went through a consolidation to the point where there's 4 or 5 in Detroit and 20 or so around the world. That industry consolidated. Hotel chains, they consolidated, right? It's everybody bought everybody else till we're just down to a couple different ones. In security, that can't happen because of the threat actor, right? We don't have a static environment that they build towards, faster feeds and speeds and lower costs like you do in any other technology industry. In security, the threat actors are coming up with new ways to attack us and new motivations too. If you think about it, in the early days, the motivation was hacktivism or just, kicks, having fun, just demonstrating how cool you were. But obviously the cyber criminals got in there and drove this industry to where it is today. But there are other actors too. There are state actors that are, stealthy. They're in there. They don't actually do anything bad necessarily, but they exist and they're there. And it's that last group that causes the most concern in industrial and OT. Because the damages, of course, are potentially so very, very high. So the so-called APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats, as we now call them, thank you to the Air Force, these APT attackers are going to be targeting critical systems because they want to cause physical effects. If they are part of either the intelligence community or the militaries of their representative states, this is what militaries do, right? They cause physical effects. So what's the point of doing anything other than cause physical effects? And that's why we're going to use industrial control systems in order to cause those. Now, I'm sure everybody in the audience recognizes that picture and understands why it's there. This is the Siemens PLC that Stuxnet attacked or targeted. Not the very one, mind you, that's probably still in Natanz in Iran. But this is one that was at a cyber range in Israel, and I visited just a couple years after Stuxnet, so grab that picture. It's attacks against those devices that are the ones that are generating this new industry and new opportunity. We're all in security, so must be an opportunity for us. We can't wish the bad actors to go away. So it turns out that I've been studying the cybersecurity industry almost since its inception, right? I worked with Checkpoint Software and ISS back in 1995. So pretty early on in the industry. It's grown a little bit since then. Today, I track over 4,040 cybersecurity vendors in these 18 top categories here. These vendors, the 4,040, have taken in $340 billion. That doesn't represent the total ever invested in cybersecurity because, of course, there's several thousand vendors that were sold over the last 25 years. Symantec being responsible for over 200 of those alone. But it's a good indicator of the size of our industry, right? And if you think about investor expectations, right, they need 10 to 100 times that back. So they value the industry at 10 to 100 times that. If you took all the people that actually worked at cybersecurity vendors, it's probably half the people in the room if everybody came in from their booths that they're manning, and it totals about 6.2 million people. Now, I'd like to say exactly what the number is for the cybersecurity market. The whole purpose of me collecting all this data was so I could do a bottom-up analysis of the industry. It's proving a little difficult to accomplish, but we're getting there. But instead of doing the traditional, when you see an estimate, and this 200 billion is the number going around now, foisted by the large analyst firms, they have to pick a number. They look at the public companies and they go, hey, those are big companies, been around for a while, they must represent 80% of the market. So we'll just, I guess, divide by 0.8 and you get the size of the market if you start with adding up all of their revenue. I think it's bigger, and I think it's growing faster than any of the other analyst firms have predicted. I'm almost there. I can tell you how fast it's growing by head count, but not yet by revenue. So look at the categories. GRC is now the largest category in security, and this only happened over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a couple reasons for that. One is it's not capital intensive to start a new GRC vendor, right? Because let's face it, you're just replacing a spreadsheet. You're recording things and putting them into a database and presenting them in a way that auditors can appreciate. So it doesn't cost much to start a new GRC vendor. And the important thing, of course, is having access to your customers. So GRC vendors tend to pop up quickly, and I'm not saying they don't succeed. They don't need as much capital, but there are a lot of them, right? And of course, you got to have specialty firms for each region and compliance regime that they act in. Data security is also a growing industry thanks to kind of the rise of cloud data security, or DSPM as our friends at Gartner call it. So lots more companies in that recently. Identity, it will always be hot for some reason. We can't just say, you know what, let's just put it all together and make it work and then we're done and we can move on. We need to have constant back and forth with identity vendors. Network security is kind of my favorite because that's what I grew up in. It has been pretty static over the last 5 to 6 years. Operations is another one of those shards that I pulled out because it's just a lot of the same things for operations, but it's support of the Security Operations Center. MSSPs are really, really hard to track because every single reseller, VAR, distributor, and consultant has become an MSSP in the last 10 years. One estimate is that there are 41,000 MSSPs. The data about those are not as interesting to me, so I just tracked the major ones. And of course, endpoint security, where now I have to correct myself. I said the industry never consolidates. In endpoint security, it did consolidate. There used to be many, many more endpoint security vendors. And the reason was pretty straightforward. First of all, traditional signature antivirus was not working very well anymore. So we needed the new kid on the block. So we needed the CrowdStrikes, SentinelOnes, Cybereason, Cylance, et cetera. And Microsoft started giving it away for free because it's kind of hard to compete with free. So sure enough, we actually had what was left of Symantec called NortonLifeLock, still a public company, acquire Avast and AVG and a couple other that begins with A as well, and renamed itself Gen Security. If you look at publicly traded cybersecurity companies, Gen Security has the highest revenue per employee of any of them. It's over $1 million. And that's because they're in support mode, right? As a matter of fact, they're kind of in anti-support mode, because if you think about it, who is still paying $39 a month for NortonLifeLock or Norton Antivirus, or $39 a year? It's the people that are of an age that they can't figure out how to get it off their system or get their credit card back. So it's interesting to watch that filtering. Probably a great investment if you're into buying stocks. So, and then application security, and finally IoT security with 155 participating vendors. Now, notice that IoT security is bigger than threat intelligence. So threat intelligence is shrinking a little bit. Fraud prevention is very static, stays there. And you would say, well, IoT security is much bigger than AI security. Yeah, no question. But those 86 vendors, 84 of them were founded in 2024. So it's quite an exciting time for the AI security. Next year, if I come back, there'll probably be at least 160 AI security vendors that we've been able to find. So, okay, security market, great. Let's talk about IoT security. This is where I start to get a little concerned when you look, I grab the vendors, sort them by size, head count, and I start to get concerned because it's only the top 3 or top 4 have over 500 employees. Those are small companies. To be a public company, you have to have over 1,000 just about. Now, your data, one, of course, that you probably don't know is actually a entertainment system, automotive. They have tools for entertainment system and automotive security. So they happen to be a very big company and a very old company that just happens to have a security product, so they make it into my database. But I think everybody would agree Armis is the big dog in the room, with Clarity and Dragos and the Zomi following up. So there should be more or bigger vendors, right, in a booming space. So I want to say that it's not a booming space, even though the demand and justification for IoT and OT security is easily there. 154 vendors, 5.7 billion. You'll notice the ratios, investment, headcount, number of companies are all about 1 to 30 IoT to the rest of the industry. I estimate it's only a $1.5 billion market, taking the percentage of each of these that are IoT security. You might not know TX1 Networks, funded by Trend Micro out of Taiwan, but growing extremely fast. Clarity hit 740 people this year. It started last year with 500 people. It's growing so very, very fast. Now, mind you, they're taking in a lot of funding as well, but typically in the last 2 years when companies got funded, they didn't immediately pour it into hiring people, right? They were being conservative with their cash because their investors were encouraging them to do that because they're a little frightened by some of the things going on in the overall market. And finally, the OT security market. So 33 vendors in this space. And the Clarity, Dragos, Nozomi make it up on top. Armis is probably going to be upset that I didn't include them in that. But every time I talk to Armis, they tell me, oh, we're not even IoT, right? We're just general asset management. So don't include us in there. So they got left out because I don't consider them a pure play OT security company. The rest of these now include the growth from last year in headcount. So you can kind of get a feel for where this is going. Not spectacular growth, right? There are plenty of companies that, in security last year that grew over 60% in headcount. Clarity, of course, did do very well at 26%. Dragos, we know they've had layoffs, probably just a symptom of overhiring, right? And not expecting the downturn that we had over the last 2 years in cybersecurity. And some of these other ones, we still track them after they got acquired. So you see the biggest drops here are actually companies that have been acquired, but they keep the brand alive. So as long as, in my database, as long as the brand is still there, the website's still up, you still buy their product from whoever the acquirer is, we keep them in the database. So, and you can identify those usually because headcount is dropping, and Rataflow is exactly one of those companies. Interesting distribution on countries as well. So I think the very first, other than Industrial Defender, the very first OT security company that I talked to was out of Israel. This is 12 years ago. And they made the argument that, hey, we see attacks against our critical infrastructure. The attackers in the region are trying to shut off our power, trying to shut off our lights, trying to disrupt us. So therefore, we've got a head start on the rest of the world because we see the attacks. Now, there's also the other argument that comes out of Israeli companies is we have a head start on the rest of the world because we are the attacker when they're working in Unit 8200, which is legitimate. And turns out now we're hearing the same story from founders that have experience in the United States NSA, which I think overall it's a good thing. Have the good guys be attackers and turn to the good side of being defenders. Now, mind you, this is a pretty good proportion. Overall, in the US, there are over 2,000 cybersecurity vendors and only 300 Israeli cybersecurity vendors. So to have half as many Israeli as United States vendors is pretty significant, right? So Israel is truly pushing the envelope and leading in cybersecurity for IoT. Germany doesn't surprise me either. In the general landscape, Germany and UK always come in second and third. But Germany, of course, tremendous manufacturing and headquarters to some of the largest industrial control companies. So it makes complete sense that we're seeing this. And you go all the way down. And this is all the countries. So, hey, there's TX1 in Taiwan. Of course, Switzerland, Spain, Poland, Norway in there. None from my favorite country, Malta or Iceland. They have security companies, but they don't have any of these. So maybe a bit of an eye chart, but just in 2024, there was $599 million invested in IoT security. And so this is the bigger market again, with all the same players at the top, but some other ones that you might not have seen. Dispel, interestingly enough. So I also track I've got a list of the Cyber 150 that I promote on our website. And these are companies that have between 50 and 500 employees and have grown the most. And in fact, grew at least 2% in the last quarter of 2024. So that's just how I filtered them out, just so I could identify the interesting companies. Dispel is the only IoT security company that made it onto the Cyber 150 list. So that got my attention to see what they're doing to have that growth rate, 75% growth rate. Obviously, they took in $25 million, so they can grow and presumably have some indication that the market's going to catch up with them and support them in that. So I guess it leads me to wrap up in that, I made statements before about the potential for OT security to be bigger than the rest of the market. And that, it's based on the value of the assets that OT security protects. IT security protects data. And it's kind of hard to pin a figure on the value of data. It's super critical, no question. Banks need their data, and everybody needs their data. The attackers need their data, and there's value there. But data isn't a dam. Data isn't water purification plants, of which there are 15,000 here in the United States. And anybody who works near or around them knows, they really are not big buyers of IoT security. They still get to relax under the umbrella of, nobody would bother attacking us. We're just responsible for putting fluoride and these other chemicals in the water, making sure it's clean and testing it accurately every single day. Why would anybody attack us? And that, of course, has never, ever been a good defensive strategy, to say that you're not part of the community of targets or victims, because you are or you will be. We are waiting for that attack that changes that focus. It's got to come from the understanding of the liability that these organizations that manage all these facilities have. And that liability, of course, involves loss of life, and they will spend a lot of money to avoid being responsible for loss of life. One of my desires would be to see regulators work with the insurance providers to recognize the risks of these and tie the organization's insurance to the potential loss due to cyber attack. When I first formulated that, thinking about the power grid, you remember, we had 3,000 power stations in the United States, and the regulators asked them to self-identify the critical ones. And we all know, any of us who've been in IT and in security specifically, if somebody asks us, what are your critical systems? You say, none of them. See, I don't have to do any of that reporting or suffer an audit, because these are not critical systems. And that's exactly what the energy industry did en masse. They all came back and they said, we don't have any. So how do you force them to actually take security seriously? Well, public utilities, there is an opportunity to go to them and say, you know what? We granted you, in your local community, we granted you a monopoly on power lines and power generation and power sales. So you get the benefits of that. Yeah, it's a pain because you got to come to us to raise your rates. But we also granted you immunity from prosecution if your failure to deliver power during a storm causes somebody's death. You don't get sued, right? It's act of God, You know, you maybe should have buried those power cables, but you didn't. You kept them on the poles. They all came down. Power was out. My mother-in-law didn't have the oxygen she needed to breathe during that time. Okay, we're going to remove that protection from liability. So you're going to have to do something to avoid the lawsuits that will come from this. And you'll have to do that by investing in cybersecurity. Well, okay, what's the next step? If somebody forces you to do that, you make that investment and you invest all that money in proving that it was always a squirrel and never a cyber incident. And you can do that with records and all the rest. So I left it, the whole argument there, because the next step is, okay, the government's going to come in and we're going to monitor your security for you, which yet may be the solution. For the other parts of the critical infrastructure, including the manufacturing, the investment demand is there. The attackers are there. We know they're there because the researchers can show you that. You can see all the open systems on open networks and reporting, and we know where the investment's got to be put in the future, which I think is rosy for the IoT security industry. Thank you very much.